Hello everybody, this is Hammer Striker here. Today I'm going to do an old versus new. So I've got an old Smith & Wesson. This one happens to be a Model 19-3 from the early 70s. And I've got a new, the restarted Colt Python. So what we're going to see is trigger feel, overall feel, and everything else is a new Colt, using this Python as an example, better than an old Smith & Wesson with this Model 19 as an example. So I'm going to start with picking up each one of them. This one is loaded with snap caps. They're inert dummy rounds to protect the firing pin. These old Smith & Wessons, the firing pin's actually on the hammer. So there's no transfer bar or any of that type of thing. So to protect the firing pin on this, I'm going to load it with those snap caps, but they're inert. And this predates the internal locking mechanism that became popular on Smith & Wessons and very unpopular with the gun community. They did interfere with the trigger, and this predates all of that. And I've got this Colt, and these are safe to dry fire, and it is unloaded. And of course this has all the modern internal safeties for the firing system, but no internal lock, because Smith & Wesson and a few other manufacturers are the only ones that are doing that. So let's do an old versus new. So I'm going to start with old, and I'm going to do the double action trigger on this old Model 19. So it's very smooth, very light, and actually relatively short for a double action revolver. It's actually a very nice, very smooth trigger. Now if I do single action by cocking it, and it does have a nice wide spur, so it's easily to manually cock this. Watch how short and crisp this trigger is. It did move, but if you blinked you missed it. This has an awesome single action trigger. The grip is really comfortable, it fits well in the hand, kind of comes up here, and you do have the back of the frame is exposed to your hand. This is a 357, but you can also shoot 38 in it, and so your hand is actually hitting the frame of the gun, but the recoil on these is minimal. They've got the right balance, the right weight, the right overall feel. So now we'll move to the Colt, which is very similar in that you're touching the back of the frame. There's no grip around it. But these are fairly heavy, and they handle recoil quite well. So I'm going to start with the double action trigger, and this is just a hair lighter and a hair smoother. Not enough that I would pick one over the other because of it, but if I have to compare them side by side, this one's just a little lighter, a little smoother, and about the same amount of travel. Another wide hammer spur makes it really easy to cock it. Notice this does not have the firing pin on the hammer itself because it uses the transfer bar mechanisms. Now I'm going to pull the single action. A little bit more travel on single action, still very light, very crisp, and very nice, but the Model 19 actually has a much shorter and nicer single action. So the way I would kind of come down to is both these triggers are awesome, bottom line, but the double action trigger on the Colt Python is a little bit better than the double action trigger on the 19, and the single action trigger on the 19 is a little bit better than the Colt. So overall, they kind of balance out. Ergonomics are very similar. Now this one's got a longer barrel. This does come in different barrel lengths, so it's a little bit nose heavy compared to the Model 19, which has just about the right barrel length. From a sights perspective, the 19, like a lot of older revolvers, had blackout sights. It does appear to be an adjustable sight. You can see the screw on it. So it is an adjustable sight, but it's a blackout sight. They're not my favorite, but it's better than gutter sights, which were popular on revolvers. The Colt has a blackout rear sight. It is also adjustable. You can see the screw right there. Right there's the screw. And it has a ramp sight with a plastic insert in it. So front sight's good on this. Rear sight, I'm not a fan of blackouts, but both of these have adjustable. And the front sight on the Colt is actually a little bit better than the front sight on the Smith & Wesson because you can actually see it. There's at least a little color to pick up. So you'd have an easier time with the sights on this. Most of the sights on the older revolvers were part of the body of the revolver, and this one appears to be the same. The Python does look like, yeah, you can change the sight on the Python if you want to. I'm going to check to make sure. I don't believe you can change the sight on the, no, the sight is all one piece on the 19. So You get more sight flexibility in the newer designs. There's a few things that are different about these. I'm not going to say one's better than the other. It's just interesting because they're different. So on the Smith & Wesson, you push forward to open the cylinder, and then it closes. And on the Smith & Wesson, the cylinder rotates counterclockwise as you cycle it. On the Colt, you pull back on the Colt to release the cylinder, and the cylinder rotates clockwise. And to some extent, these were things that kind of defined one versus the other and were kind of talking points at the time. I think in the modern times, it really comes more down to the trigger than which way things operate, because they both work. The pullback on this, it's got a bit of a ledge, so it's easy to get a hold of. And of course, on the Smith & Wesson and the ones that push forward usually have a ramp, so that there's something for your finger to push up against as you push forward. The shape of the trigger itself can make a bit of a difference too, especially in double action mode of how your hand rolls across it. This has got kind of a definitive hook in and a place like a ramp that your hand can fit on. As you pull it back, it's nice and smooth and it keeps your finger in position. This has a little more of just kind of a half circle shape, but your finger still stays well in place because the trigger is so light that there's nothing really to drive your finger off. The face of the trigger is serrated on both of them. The face of the trigger on the 19 is a little more curved, so it kind of bevels up to a peak and then back down again. As you can see from the edge, it's a little bit high in the middle. If this were a heavier trigger, that might put a lot of pressure in one spot on your finger, but being a light trigger doesn't matter so much. And the Colt is pretty much straight across, so there's going to be no high point on your finger, which again will make more of a difference. And, you can, as I tilt it back and forth, you can see it's all pretty much flat across. You're going to find that there's no high spot that's going to point in on your finger. And the serrations, if I tilt it this way, you can see the serrations on the flat face of the trigger. Some of these things are things that between the two would define which one you're going to like better. Trigger guard is kind of evenly sized and wide on the Colt and kind of canted to the forward a little bit. This would make this one a little easier to holster. Your holster wouldn't have to be quite as bulky. But again, there are nuancy differences. Neither one of these is going to make a huge difference whether you would pick one or the other, either when they were both being manufactured together and were competing with each other, or now actually they're both being made again and you'd be choosing between one or the other. Beyond that, if you like our videos, please check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Rumble, Gatter, pretty much everywhere. And please consider supporting us on Utreon, where we're moving some videos to that YouTube is no longer allowing channels to do. And thank you.